Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 4, where we're going to be talking about participles. All right. We're going to go over kind of all of participles. Oh, my arrows didn't translate, it looks like. So I just want to talk about participles in English first. So English tends to have two participles, the present participle and the past participle. The present participle uses that ing form. So running is an example. The past participle, that ed form. Baked, seen, something like that. The reason I included 2 there is that the ed is the most common form, but there are some alternates, the n being the most common alternate, and then some verbs are just irregular in their participial form. So English uses participles in 3 ways, or maybe 2.5 ways, 2 with a subdivision of 2. First, in combination with a helping verb to make a main verb. All right. So the truck is skidding. So skidding is technically a participle. It is part of that main verb is skidding. You'll note that the truck is skidding is a full sentence. It was broken. All right. Broken, same thing. Used in conjunction with that was to make a main verb. He had been seen. Same thing. Had been are 2 helping verbs kind of used as one unit. Seen as the participle that makes it that main verb. For the most part, Latin will not use participles in this way. Latin does have a few forms that use participles with helping verbs as main verbs, but in general, Latin will use participles much more as adjectives than as parts of main verbs. So just kind of keep that in mind. Excuse me, that's a distinction between Latin and English. English does this fairly commonly. Latin does not do this nearly as commonly. So what a participle is an adjective, a verb used as an adjective. All right, so what that means is it's sort of half verb in the sense of what it means and what can go with it, and half adjective in the sense that it agrees with and is connected to a noun. So the skidding truck crashed. All right, you can see that skidding describes truck. What is the truck doing? It is skidding. All right, what did it do? It crashed. But the participle skidding is the adjective there. All right, and that's that present active, present participle with the ing. The broken radio was silent. All right, so same thing, right? Broken is an adjective describing the radio. You could say the big radio, or you could say the broken radio. Big is a straight adjective. Broken is a participle, meaning it is an adjective, but that adjective is formed from a verb. And then, to some extent, the most awkward in this form, the seen father. We wouldn't really say that commonly, so I included an alternate form. The father who was seen laughed. All right, and both of those in Latin are, again, a participle, and participles can be translated with that relative pronoun form, the who, the W word in English. In English, relative clauses are more common than participles for things like that. Latin tends to refer participles. English tends to refer relative clauses. So when you're translating participles into English, you can use a relative clause if you want or if it sounds better. All right, so that's a straight adjective. As I did with radio, you can kind of substitute those participles with non-participle adjectives or non-verb adjectives, and you'd have essentially the same sentence. All right, so the last bullet there as adjective with clause, same words, but now you have verbal elements thrown in or modifying the participle. And this is where the participle shows off its verb capabilities. So the truck skidding off the road into a tree made a loud noise. So skidding all the way to tree is that participial phrase. Skidding still describes the truck. What's the truck doing? It's skidding. But now we've got these modifiers of skidding. So off of the road, right? That's a prepositional phrase. Into a tree, another prepositional phrase. And both of those are going with skidding. So the radio, broken because it was dropped on the floor, was silent. Same thing. Broken still describes the radio, still agrees with radio, but now it's got this clause going with it. Why was it broken? Because it was dropped on the floor. So that whole clause goes with broken. And then the father, seen by his boss watching sports on his computer, laughed. All right, and then you've got all sorts of things tacked on with seen. So seen by his boss watching sports on his computer, all elements that modify seen. All right, so in English, and for the most part in Latin, participles can be used as straight adjectives, the skidding truck, the broken radio, the seen father, or as adjectives that have clause elements with them, skidding off the road into a tree. All right, so let's focus on the left side of this page to begin with. All right, these are the four participles that Latin has: the present active, the perfect passive, the future active, and the future passive. Now, as adjectives, participles will use adjective endings, and I've specified which adjective endings each participle will use. All right, the good news is that only the present active uses third declension endings, which are a little trickier, or at least a little more variable than 2-1-2 us, adjective endings. Perfect passive, future active, and future passive will all use those us, endings, which might be a little more familiar to you. All right, so again, the participle must agree with the noun. It is an adjective, so it is going to agree. Think of it as just like adjectives that you've already learned. It's going to function the same way in terms of agreement and in terms of endings. The only difference is that participles will be more likely to have things going with it, things expanding its meaning. Straight adjectives can have those as well. It's just more common for participles to have them. All right? So moving to the present active participle, you can see these are those third declension adjective endings that we talked about. Participles will variably use the I or the E ending for the ablative. Adjectives use the I ending, nouns use the E ending. The more verbal a participle is in the ablative, the more likely it is to use the E ending. The more adjectival it is in the ablative, the more likely it is to use the I ending. And then the plural endings are here as well. And these should look very familiar. These are your straight third declension endings. There's really no difference between these endings and the third declension endings that you already know. These are put onto the present stem. All right, so porto, portare. All right, there is my stem, port. My character is about A, and then my ending. They are one termination, third declension adjectives. If you remember, that means they all three genders have the same nominative form. And then that NT is the stem for all the other endings. So uns, untis is sort of the way that we remember the nominative and the genitive. And I just point out that no different from other neuter forms, but the accusative is going to be the same as the nominative because the nominative neuter is portans or the uns form. The accusative neuter, singular, will be the uns form as well. Otherwise, they function ending-wise just like any other third declension adjective. No. Yes, I did. All right, skip the slide. So just to how they're translated, all right, as we talked about, they're translated with that ing, kind of verbing, in the case of portans, carrying. All right, participles as adjectives must agree. So just like adjectives, they will agree in gender, number, and case. And then you've got some examples here, right, for sort of all of your conjugations, plus irregular verbs. Some irregular verbs don't have participles. Some are not particularly common. That's why they're in parentheses. Or in the case of possum, that's actually just sort of an adjective, potens, meaning powerful, literally being able. So just to go through these in terms of what they mean, and again, this is a meaning in a vacuum. Obviously, they'll mean something slightly different when they're attached to a noun with a case, but portans, portantis, carrying, docens, docentis, teaching, ponens, ponentis, placing, capiens, capientis, seizing, audiens, audientis, hearing. I won't do the irregulars. Did I miss? All right. So, as I said, they're formed from the present stem, and these are the vowels that precede the endings, just to give you a nice little chart there. Perfect passive is the fourth principal part, so no change to it. It just is the fourth principal part. If there is a UR in the fourth principal part, what that means is that there is no, the verb does not have any passive forms. So sum esse fui futurus is perhaps the most common example. Obviously, the verb to be can't be passive. So the futurus is not the perfect passive participle, and the UR is what indicates that. So a side note, not very common, but something to keep in mind. In any case, these participles are declined just like your average 2-1-2 adjective, us, e, I-E, o, I-O, etc. Okay? Same with present participles, no different from a straight us, adjective in terms of how it is declined or the endings that it uses. All right, so that's the perfect passive participle of portatus form out for you. All right, and you can see here that the perfect passive participle is translated having been verbed or verbed. It's that ed form. The having been is not necessary, but it is helpful. Verbed, just the straight ed form, can also be a main verb form, the active past tense of a main verb. So I hit the ball, all right? That's your participial form, right? Or the same as the participle. I having been hit by the ball, right? By the ball. With that having been, you know it's not a main verb. So I hit the ball. Hit is a main verb, right? It's an active verb with ball as its direct object. I, comma, pause, having been hit, comma, pause, by the ball. Well, actually, no comma, pause, second time there. I, pause, having been hit by the ball, pause, took first base. All right. So again, I can say I, pause, hit by the ball, pause, took first base, but the hit can be confusing. It can sound like an active form. So the having been is a useful thing to use, but it is not necessary. I do recommend it, especially at the beginning, to help you tell the difference between the passive participle and the active main verb. All right, and again, here are your examples of straight conjugations and then irregular verbs. A lot of irregular verbs don't have passive, so that's where the X's come from. So portatus, having been carried, doctus, having been taught, positus, having been placed, captus, having been captured, seized, auditus, having been heard. So this is your future active participle, also formed from the fourth principal part, but you're adding in this UR, all right? So you can see that all these forms have the UR. It's what's called an infix. You might know prefixes and suffixes, prefix coming before, suffix coming after. An infix is something that comes in the middle. So this infix UR is used to distinguish the perfect passive participle from the future active participle. It's translated about to ver, right? So the boy about to run away was caught. All right, and that's that future active participle. So portatoris, about to carry, doctorus, about to teach, positoris, about to place, captoris, about to seize, auditoris, about to hear. All right, so that is the future active. Now, I know this is a lot, and it seems like a lot of forms, but remember, there are no new endings here. The endings are used with slightly different things. Participles are kind of a new idea, but you're not really memorizing new forms as much as you're studying and understanding how participles work, especially in terms of agreeing with a noun. They will agree just like any other adjective agrees, but they are slightly different in the sense that they come from verbs and can have verbal things that go with it. So I thought we'd take a look at some participles. For you Harry Potter fans, this is the Hogwarts seal, and you can see here dormiens with that ns ending. That is our present active participle. That is the nominative of the present active participle. So it's nominative, it's singular, it can be any gender. We need a noun that is nominative and singular, masculine, feminine, or neuter for it to agree with. And of course, that noun is Draco. All right. This, by the way, titilandus, is the future passive participle. Future passive participle is a little different, so they don't include it in this chapter, but we will get to it. All right. So, what kind of dragon should never be disturbed? A dormiens dragon, a sleeping dragon. So a sleeping dragon should never be disturbed. And there's that participle with the ing. This is our present participle. Comes from the verb to sleep, dormio, dormire. There's that ie characteristic vowel with that ns for the nominative singular ending. So a sleeping dragon should never be disturbed. If you're a soccer fan, you might have heard of this. This is a podcast, or at least it started as a podcast. Now they're on ESPN, called Men in Blazers. They talk soccer, and they have a Latin motto. So vestiti, all right, is a perfect passive participle. Generally speaking, that T is kind of an indicator that you're dealing with the perfect passive participle. Because they are men in blazers, their motto is weary men, dressed, vestiti, recta, well or correctly or appropriately. Recta is an adverb going with vestiti. All right, and in that you get a nice illustration where on the one hand, vestiti is very much an adjective agreeing with weary. On the other hand, it is a verb in that this adverb recta modifies it, expands it, describes it. So men having been dressed or just dressed well, correctly, appropriately, however you want to do that. All right, this is the motto of South Carolina, or the seal of South Carolina, And you can see here that parati is that perfect passive participle with that T ending. So it agrees with that I ending, nominative plural, essentially with kind of a not stated subject. Just people, they, whatever. So having been prepared for, by courage and by resources. Obibus are resources. All right, and these are some exercises from the book. All right, so they're good to practice. So transform each participial clause into 2 different finite clauses in English. Don't translate into Latin. So the barking dog looks at me. All right, the dog that is barking while it is barking. So just getting you used to different ways of translating or rendering the participle. So people jumped off the sinking ship, number 1. People jumped off the ship that was sinking. People jumped off the ship because it was sinking. All right, so just different ways to translate the participle. All right, and then in 139 there, you're just practicing with agreement. So timens is nominative singular and agrees with consul. All right, vulneratus is nominative singular. It agrees with miles. Note that they're not always next to the noun that they modify. All right, so let's take a look at this week's summatives. So you're just translating the sentences into English. As they're getting more complicated, watch out for organizing them. Just like in the previous exercise, here's our participle. It's agreeing with consul, and exercitum is the direct object of that active participle timen. So the consul, fearing the army, tried to flee. Temptat discedere. All right. So watch out for structure. Use this as a way to practice agreement and reviewing endings. Same thing here. All right. Vulneratus goes with miles. The soldier wounded by the Gauls came home. And then for your writing, all right, you're just translating the underlined part into Latin. You're not translating the whole sentence, just the underlined part. But these are going to be participles. Make sure that you know whether they're active or passive. Make sure you know how to form the participles, and watch out for agreement. Remember, the noun will determine the ending. All right? All right, so that's it for this week. Hope you have a good week. Please email me with any questions, and I will be here next week. Thanks.